to the door, and then what's the second one? We have one washroom. It's not that friendly, so please make sure whenever you flush it. Yeah, you just get a hang of it. The first time it's always bad, but the second time you flush it, it will go down. The third is we have, if you want to buy Tariq's book, which we hope that you will, we have a submit machine here and we can use that to make payments. And yeah, that's it. And please make sure that you keep the space clean. And I'm aware that it wasn't clean to start with, but yeah, thank you so much for. It was my wedding yesterday as well.
Yeah. Oh, what a fabulous thing. It's the first time ever I've done an intro after somebody's taken the mic who's been married. And I do hope you have a brilliant, brilliant honeymoon that goes somewhere absolutely marvelous. It's been so lovely to know you in the short time that I have. I'm wishing you many happy years ahead. So here we are with more happiness, more joy, because we have today, this evening, the launch of this amazing book. The third in the triptych, three bullets which came out first, one drop came out second, third, but perhaps the most weighty, the most important of the three, the second coming by Tariq Mehmood. Give him a little round of applause. Well done, Tariq. He got it across the line. That's the main thing, you know, because it was 3 years in the writing, and the turmoil that we went through was absolutely phenomenal. And there were many times when we either despaired or doubted. Well, that's the life of the writer, I guess. We're so pleased that he's made it to this point. At this point, indeed, I will hand over to our fellow collaborator, Mr. Melvin Burgess, who's going to do a short intro on the background to the triptych.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Yes, Tariq got it over the line. It was a haul, but a very successful one in the end. It had to be a fantastic book. So it's a triptych, is what we called it. It was a triptych. When I first met Tariq, he was always saying to me, "Oh, you know, we should do something together. You know, me, you, and Pete, we should do something together." And I was like, "Oh, Christ, no." I've tried to do novels with novelists before, and I can tell you it's hell on earth. They are the slipperiest wee little bastards you can imagine. It's not so much herding cats, it's like herding snakes. Poisonous, nasty snakes as well. Always going off doing their own thing. And these two are no exception. However, okay, at that point, and I'm sure we'll hear more about this, and this was quite a few years ago, the whole civil war in Syria, the whole Syrian conflict with all the big players playing their nasty wee parts over there was going on. And I had begun to think of, you know, it's funny actually, because by this point I'd already decided that conflict had been going on for so long that this idea had become redundant, which just goes to show how wrong you can be. And I had this trick which I've done before, which is basically, what if it happened here? You know, I'd done this some years ago with a book called Baby It'll Fly High, where I'd heard about how in Bogota, in Colombia, when they wanted when something important was happening in the city, and there were a lot of you know, street kids there, they would clean them up by actually killing them. I remember hearing this on the radio. It's an astonishing way of dealing with a homelessness problem, isn't it? And I think, you know, I remember hearing an interview with a policeman who was saying, well, you know, they're only going to grow up to be proper criminals. So, you know, get rid of them before they, you know, before they get there. This was the thing. So I did this book imagining that a similar sort of situation was happening here in the UK, and I suggested to these guys that we imagine that something like that Syrian conflict was happening here, in which people were desperately trying to leave and were, you know, trying to get somewhere safe, but didn't want them, and that you had these, you know, the big powers fighting over the remains. And so that was the basic idea. And Tariq went away and came up with a wonderful idea of the political scenario, which began with, if I remember correctly, with the Americans, failing to pay their debts, and the dollar suddenly crashing, and the various American militias around the world not being paid. So basically, you had all these sort of mercenary, heavily armed US armies scattered around the world. And Pete came up with this fabulously evocative idea of using drones and some sort of AI, I suppose, really, to wipe the brains and the memories of people and to try and replace them with what should we say, more appropriate memories and more appropriate thoughts, fitting in with the with very nasty regime which Tariq dreamed up. Fabulous way of looking at identity. And anyway, so we did our things. I mean, my book was a lot more, perhaps a little less, what's the word, high concept. Perhaps I simply wanted someone who was just trying to get out, just wanted to escape the place, but was wandering around the country. And I remember suggesting to Pete to tie the whole thing together. I thought she might wander around and sort of tie the whole thing together. I remember suggesting to Pete that he had this prison camp, a city-sized prison camp in which people were being kept and being rewritten, basically. Their characters were being replaced with more appropriate characters for the regime. And I said, oh, my kid could come there and bring some sort of software, some virus which could reverse the process. I remember Pete saying to me, well, he said that's fine, Melvin, but I'm not having the white cavalry. So I had to do a mixed race girl, and both Pete and Tariq were very generous in helping me, deal with that. That was my first attempt to do that. And there we go. So yes, appropriately, it was. This was the first one. This was the second one. Tariq's the third one. So it's kind of 3, 1, 2 or something like that. And that's the triptych. And this is the final one. So we're celebrating today because this is the completion of our project. So there we go. That's how it came about. That's how it was born. And now I'm going to ask the wonderful Mr. Kalu to come forward and tell us about the wonderful fun we had editing one another.
Well, it would have been useful for the Mehmood household to have a red carpet, the amount of blood that was shed. Editing. I am the artistic director of Common Culture with our banners at the back, and we've been running the Hard Press project. We've been running the Hard Press project, which is looking at small presses across Greater Manchester from 1977 to about 2017, and the voices that were promoted through those presses. And in terms of what we've tried to do, we've always, I think, myself and Tariq, through the decades really, that we've been working together, always tried to give voices to those who haven't had a voice, and to put forward ideas that may actually be unpopular. And so, in terms of the editing process, I know you think I might be drifting, but it was like, he needs editing himself. In terms of the editing process, I left the high concepts to Melvin and Tariq, the political matters. The editing process was very much about trying to make sure that the structure of every novel was strong, that it linked properly with the other two novels which it was linking with, and that each individual novel was in itself a good read. With Tariq's novel, I would use the general conventional division of it into 3 parts. Little pause there while he panics. Beginning, middle, and end. And I would say that the beginning was what I was involved in as an editor, probably most, because I really think that if you get the beginning right, you'll write well through the middle and to the end. And so for the beginning, what we were looking for was dynamism, strong plot, great character, and the seeds of psychological development that will run all the way through the book. And it's actually the most important part of the book. The middle was edited by Melvin. Middle part, yeah, middle's really good, isn't it? But yeah, the early part, as usual, was an arm wrestle with Tariq as various openings that he wanted to try out, which were rejected, rewritten, and sent around the team, really. Melvin had his part in that, until we managed to get it locked, get it in such a way that it was highly readable, engaging, thrilling. And I think that the early part, I wanted it to have that sense of optimism that I felt all these novels should have, despite the bleak scenario, because the characters are young, and I do believe that optimism, hope, rides with youth. And although all three, some of us more than others, are older men now, we can still remember what hope looks like, and both of us still able to write it into the novels. So yeah, the first part, I think, embodies that. There's chaos, dynamism, hope, psychological, the seeds of psychological development. When it got to the middle, the way the story moves, Second Coming, it starts to resemble a little bit more One Drop, in that it's the location is it's a clinic where the main character Mara is trapped, you might say. And this presents a lot of difficulties for writers, because when you're writing as Melvin was and as I was, where you can just move scenes, you can move from one place to another, you can encounter new people very easily when you're free, when the characters are free to wander wherever they're wandering. It's much more difficult if you're in the same location for any length of time. And so the confinement section of the novel, the middle of the novel, was where we really had to work hard as editors to make sure that the psychological narrative was moving forward well enough. And if I may say, there was when you write, it's not just mechanical. You always put something of yourself into the writing. And many a time when I've been writing Sam's right, some of those novels, Tariq has told me, Pete, the reason you can't write this particular chapter, this particular episode, is you've got an issue with yourself. You've got a problem in your soul, in your heart, and you need to solve that problem, and then you'll write well. Well, in Tariq's case, he had the most difficult thing, which was that aspects of the middle section of the novel had begun to resemble aspects of one of his daughters. And so it took a phenomenal amount of time, patience, effort, energy, and emotion to move through that. And it's absolutely a miracle, an amazing thing that you managed to do it. I do know that, as I said, it was difficult for both me and Melvin to cope, Tariq, to get through that middle section, because we were editing out many of the things that he wanted to dwell on, because that was his reality. And we were saying, okay, we get it, but the novel itself cannot dwell there for so long. That was probably the hardest. I don't know how you felt about it.
That was the hardest section. It was technically a very difficult section as well.
Yeah.
Technically very, very difficult. I'll be asking him about that later on.
So let's moving on to the happy time. Finally, he burst free, and the middle section was done. And for some reason, by some kind of I don't know, dialectical event, he decided at one point. Sorry, Tariq, won't tell us. He decided at one point that he wanted a Bollywood ending. I swear down. I had all kinds of things, dancers, helicopters flying in, things blowing up left, right, and centre. And we're like, Tariq, wait. Try rereading the novel. You've forgotten what you wrote at the beginning. We need some kind of tonal consistency. And he nailed it in the end. Brilliant ending that he pulled off. So those are the trials and travails, the problems that you have as editor. It was a great joy to edit this one, not only because we got to eat a lot, we got to drink a lot, but because, you know, they're both great company. And as Melvin said, even though as a rule, it's a fate worse than hell to attempt to write with another writer. In this case, in the case of this trip, it's thoroughly enjoyable. So on that note, I will hand you back to Melvin, I believe. No, we're going to get into the reading. Yeah. Anya, we waffled on so much about the book. I'm sure they're all intrigued to know what actually is in the book. So give a round of applause to Anya, who's going to read from it.
Sit down.
Relax.
Yeah, sit next
down,
to
so
her.
I'm waiting.
Hold
My own daughter, do you remember?
Chapter 8, Day of the Swine. The next morning, Tats burst into my room, shouting, "Something's happening at the mosque!" He drew the curtains back, flooding my room with light. Chili was next to him, standing on my jeans, looking worried. My mobile showed it was 9:25 a.m. "Something's always happening there. Why do I care?" I moaned, putting the mobile under my quilt. I hadn't managed to go to sleep till 4 a.m., and even after that was slipping in and out of nightmares. Sometimes I was being cut up, sometimes my house was on fire, sometimes I was just running and running, but couldn't work out from what. And now the last thing I wanted was to be woken up by this headache. "They're attacking it," Tats said, and turned around. Chili barked and followed Tats down. I shot out of bed, jumped into my trousers, grabbed my mobile, and went down. Mum and Tats were leaving the house with Chili barking from the living room where he had been locked up. Many of our neighbours were also out, all walking in the direction of the mosque. 2 police motorcycle officers stopped us at the end of the street. No one protested, as behind them someone was being loaded into an ambulance. But even after the ambulance left, we were still not allowed to go through. Mum stepped forward, walked straight towards the policeman, and said, "Lay a hand on me and see what happens to you." "Yeah, you dare touch her," Dad said as he ran past me towards Mum. He was still in his pajamas. The policeman didn't move for a moment. Then they got an order on their radios and rode away. People stopped in stunned silence when we got to the mosque. A huge pig's head covered in blood had been placed on the spikes of the mosque railings. Blood dripped down its sides and down the railings. The door of the mosque had been splashed with a load of blood as well. I texted Zainab, "You heard what happened?" I'd forgotten she was already in the mosque. She didn't reply. And then I found out it was Zainab who had been taken away in the ambulance. She'd been inside the mosque with her dad when they came to the pig's head. She had tried to stop the attackers and one of them had stabbed her. Mum drove me to the Royal Free Hospital where they had taken Zainab. She had been stabbed multiple times, including through the heart. There were lots of people from the mosque in the hospital's car park, all silent. The corridor leading to the ICU was full of whispers. Zainab was dead. She died on the spot. She died in the ambulance. She died in the ICU. Zainab was with Allah. We waited around for a while. Mum held my hand and spoke to someone. I heard nothing. We stood silently for a while longer, and then Mum let go of my hand and hugged me, trembling. And then, after how long, I don't know, we padded out of the hospital. "We were going to read some poetry," I said as we drove back home. Mum pressed on my hand. There must have been traffic, but I don't remember seeing it. When I got home, I ran up to my room and sat on the bed. Chili followed me and slumped down by my feet. How cold and selfish of me, I thought. I should have gone to the mosque in the morning. Maybe I could have saved her. Chili looked up at me, questioning, and I said, "How could I have told Zainab, get a life, to her Chili? How could I?" He wagged his tail and placed his head next to my feet. A week went by in the blink of a nightmare. I felt all cold inside, but could find no tears. I wanted the world to stop and just go away. I picked up my notebook, which I hadn't touched for how long I no longer knew, and wrote, "I can't think of you, in the past tense, come back as a poem, at least." All of a sudden, my eyes blurred and tears fell on the page, and I cried a volcano. Mum ran up, I hugged her and cried and told her I was going to read a poem with her. Tats came up and held my hand, and I cried,
I used to make her call me Baji. I'll call you Baji, he said. I cried and cried until my eyes could shed no more tears, and in the days that followed, I could feel my insides burning up. I could not stop the nightmares, the food had no taste, I felt nothing. I could not sit anywhere for more than a few minutes. If I saw anyone, I wanted to get away from them and be alone, and when I was alone, I could not bear being on my own. I didn't realize how much I would miss Zainab. And then one night, when I was lost in one of my nightmares, I heard her say, Ya Allah, Madad, oh Allah, Ali, help me. Then in another nightmare, she said, pray for me, Mara, and you will find peace for yourself. I told my mom I wanted to go to the mosque and pray. I was expecting her to ridicule me, but she said, that's good, dear. I didn't know how to pray and just followed what the other women did. When I touched the ground with my forehead, I felt I belonged. When I lifted it off the floor, I felt Zainab beside me. They would not release Zainab's body for two long months. For the first few days after Zainab's death, Lena came to me and just sat near me for hours, and then we went home. Sometimes I would mumble unintelligibly, and even then Lena would just sit quietly. Ash came to me a few times, but I told him to leave me alone until Zainab's funeral. He did, but phoned and sent me a message or two each day with lots of kisses, but I rarely replied, and never with a kiss. Finally, the day that Zainab's funeral arrived, Mum taught me how to wash myself according to Islam, and I did my ghusl before going to the mosque. Mum and I both dressed in traditional white clothes. There were so many solemn people out on the street leading to the mosque that it was hard to imagine that they were all neighbours. I covered my head with my dupatta, just like Mum, and silently walked into the mosque. I had never seen so many shoes in the women's section of the mosque. All the cubicles for shoes were full, and there were so many on the floor, some slippers stuffed into each other, others haphazardly strewn about. I stepped on a few before going into the women's hall. A woman sprinkled me with some rose water as I stood in the last line. Zainab is in the front, sweetheart. Let's go say our farewells, Mum said to me. I trembled all over. I was not ready to say farewell. I didn't know what to do until Mum held my hand and led me to the front. We manoeuvred our way to the front, stepping silently through lines of women on the blue-tiled carpeted floor. Each tile was spaced from the next, so that one person could prostrate in prayer. Zainab's family was sitting around her brown carved wooden coffin. It was placed on a trolley. Her mother had one of her hands on the coffin, and with the other she held her forehead. She lifted her head as I got closer, looked at me with blood-tired eyes, and nodded. The top of the coffin had a small piece of glass through which I could see Zainab, but her eyes, Zainab's face, was covered in the white cloth of the coffin. It was then that it hit me that I was never, ever going to see Zainab again. And I wanted to open the coffin and kiss her one final goodbye. They stabbed her in the face, but she went with both her eyes, her mother said in a broken voice. Can I stay with her a little while, Auntie? I cried. Only prayers will help your Zainab now. Zainab's mother said. Two women in the first line moved, making space for us. I kissed the coffin and stayed leaning for a while I kissed the coffin and stayed leaning for a little while until Mum got me to sit next to her. I hugged her and we wept. Some of the women next to Zainab's coffin started reading from the Quran. I lost track of the time during which Lena came and sat next to me. She had a black and white hijab on, and like me and Mum, she was wearing white clothes. I realized Zainab was about to leave me forever when some men came and started to take her to the main hall where the men's funeral prayers were held. I stood up and shouted, Zainab! Lena held my hand and tugged it for me to sit down. Mum shook her head. I'm not ready to leave her, I cried, looking over my shoulder as Zainab's body left the women's hall. Lena held me even tighter. I want to pray for her, I said. We can later, Mum said, if that's what you want. I want to read at her funeral, I said, behind her coffin. Lena patted me on the back. It's men who do it, that's not our role. I was about to sit down next to Lena when a ray of sun suddenly shot through the mosque side windows and lit up large words painted in green on the other side of the wall. I bear witness that there is no God except Allah. One is He, no partner hath He, and I bear witness that Muhammad is His servant and messenger. I pulled Lena up and said, I want to pray for my friend now, and I'm going to. Lena was nervous, walked behind me, giving me little tugs to slow me down. But I wasn't really thinking about what I was doing. I just strode towards the men's hall. We were stopped at the big double doors by a bearded man. He had a rose water spray bottle in his hand. He shook his head at me. No women allowed. I want to pray for her, I said. Lena dug her nails into my hand, but I pushed past the man, pulling Lena along. He blocked her. Lena let go of my hand, stepped forward towards him, and pulled the niqab off her face. The men stepped back. We were in the hall. My dad came rushing from among the crowd, grabbed me by the arms and said, No, Mara. We compromised. Lena and I stood at the back of the hall, and I covered my head with my headscarf. While the imam gave a speech, lads in 1 and 2s came and stood next to Lena and me. And by the time the funeral prayers started, some girls had joined us as well. After the prayers ended, the imam said through the mosque speakers, I know there is a lot of anger, especially among young people, but we must let the authorities do what needs to be done. We will take the body of Zainab Ali to her final resting place in Watford, and the family of Zainab Ali requests that all those who have come here from outside the wood please stay and have some food. I walked out of the mosque hall. Lena was whispering, You've got balls. I pinched her arm. How could you say such a thing at this time, Lena? Sorry. I took the headscarf off, tied it round my waist, and said, Come on, Lena. Me and Lena ran down a corridor at the rear of the mosque. It was a narrow corridor with lines of pipes running along one side of the wall and some panels missing from the ceiling. Paint flaked off its walls. We continued past the kitchen through a cloud of steaming spice from the food being prepared for funeral attendees to get to where the coffins were loaded onto hearses. We had to get out of the building and back in through another entrance. I opened the fire exit with a push of both hands, and we rushed out into the back and startled a white man who threw his cigarette onto the ground and quickly stubbed it under his shiny black shoes, put his black bowler hat on his head, and stood soberly to attention. He wore the black uniform of a funeral company. I apologized to him, and we went in to the other side entrance, stepped over a pile of men's shoes, and came out in the side extension of the mosque where Zainab was being loaded into the hearse, waiting. I don't know where Mum came from, but she had a bunch of flowers in her hand. She gave me these, and I walked around the hearse and placed them on the coffin. The top of the hearse was decorated by multicolored lilies, Zainab's favorite flower, and in the side glass of the vehicle it said in words made out of flowers, Farewell, Zainab. And at the back of the coffin it said, Daughter. Oh God, Zainab, come back, please, I thought. We waited in silence for a while and waited for the rear door of the hearse to shut. People surrounded the hearse, many from our college. The engine started. The people from the front moved to the sides. A ripple pushed through the people on the sides until someone from one side knocked into me and from the other into Lena. Lena and I held hands. We were the closest to the hearse. I touched its shining black body with the palm of my hand. It was cold. I could smell the scent of lilies. They reminded me of Zainab's voice when she used to recite poems to me. I felt a bittersweet taste on my tongue. A woman wailed inside the mosque at the hearse, drove through the gate. 2 mosque stewards with fluorescent waistcoats stood in the middle of the road, stopping oncoming traffic. The hearse turned right towards the high road. More and more people joined us. Some came out of the mosque, others from the side streets. A moving mass of us crossed both sides of the pavement, silently following the coffin. On the other side of the road, a woman in green lycra jogging clothes stared at us. She pulled one knee after the other to her chest. An old white man with a shopping trolley stopped, took his hat off, and stood still for a moment. As we got to the top of the road, I heard voices singing. It was somewhere in the distance on one of the side streets. The hearse turned left as it approached the high street. Some lads ran from the sides and stood in front of it, and then it stopped. "What's happening?" A woman with bright red lipstick and a black sleeveless t-shirt asked the man next to her. "Trouble," the man replied. He too was wearing a sleeveless black t-shirt and black trousers. One of the mosque stewards I had seen early tapped me on the shoulder, pushed past me, and waved through the crowds towards the front of the hearse, shouting, "Move out of the way of the hearse." The singing became a bit clearer, but words were still unintelligible. It sounded like a football chop. More and more people pushed past me and Lena. The front became invisible behind a wall of blacks. For a moment, I was squashed between a wall of people, but slowly it thinned until I felt fresh wind on my face. Lena and I started walking again. We continued to march even after the hearse sped off. We continued to walk in the direction of the hearse, even though it sped north towards the M1 on its way to Watford. The singing got louder and louder. A horde of English flag-carved Ryan Blood supporters marched out of the side streets. Some of them had baseball bats in their hands, some wore balaclavas. They clapped and sang, "Hey, ho, one down, a million to go." We stood still and watched the hearse go. There were hundreds of us now. I became so angry, raising hand in the air and shouted, "Racist scum, out of the way, we shall fight and win the day." A roar went up from our side, and then someone started chanting my words. I joined an angry wave of people gushing past me towards the Blood supporters. They fled. We stopped at the roundabout at the end of the high road. A long line of police, some on horsebacks, blocked our path. The Blood supporters were behind that line. A helicopter turned up and through its speakers ordered us to disperse or be arrested. The Blood supporters started clapping and chanting even louder, "One dead, a million to go." Everyone looked at me to say something like I knew what we should do. Someone shouted, "They're going to be back tonight." In that second, I remembered Mum telling me about the time when she'd lived in East London and skinhead gangs roamed the streets, attacking black people, and how she'd been part of a youth group that patrolled their streets at night. She said the power of numbers was what enabled them to protect themselves without any resource to violence. "If they are back, then so will we be," I said. "We don't have to reduce ourselves to their level. We will defend ourselves peacefully, but unyieldingly." The cheers rang out. The gathering broke up with a great buzz. "Unyieldingly, you haven't half got a vocabulary," Lena said, putting her hand in mine. For someone so tall and big, Lena had skinny fingers. That evening, when I got home, Dad was glued to the television. There was a breaking news headline: "Muslims riot in London." The news was about us. There were pictures of burning cars and masked kids throwing petrol bombs at police. "This didn't happen here, Dad." He carried on staring at the television. Lena rounded up 6 kids from the neighbourhood, and we met in our kitchen. We made calls. 30 people were up to patrolling this neighbourhood. We divided them into 6 groups of 5. One group went round in a car, the others stood at strategic entry points. Me and Lena stayed behind in a sort of control room, looking at a large map on my computer screen in my bedroom. Someone had recorded our meeting and put out some audio of me speaking in a video and shared this on Instagram. By the end of the night, they'd added shots of our patrols and images of the earlier events. It had gone viral by the morning. The next evening, when Mum came home from work, Dad had a big fight with her over me. She was ashamed of me for what I had done. She was proud of me and how I had upheld the principle of non-violent resistance. Dad opened the bottle of wine. Mum said he was drinking too much, and besides, what was the point of all the prayers when afterwards each night he knocked back his homemade cider, his homebrew cider topped up with red wine. He called her a liar, boasting that he never drank more than 1 bottle of wine, and the cider didn't count as it was homebrew, so the alcohol content was unverified. Then they fought over who drank too much, and Mum finished a bottle off during this scrap. Just another cracking night in Cricklewood. That evening, Ash sent me a message with a link to some breaking news: Regent's Park Mosque burning. I clicked the link. It was dead. I searched on the news sites. Nothing.
Really, thank you so much for that. On your way now to Melbourne, and do to give him a good roasting.
He's going to get a good roasting treat. Come and join me on the sofa. Sorry, Mehmood. Okay, apparently the lady who was supposed to be interviewing Tariq didn't come along, so I had to spend my drive here thinking some difficult questions to skewer him. Okay, after the torment he put us through trying to edit his book. However, let's start off with a nice easy one, Tariq. So this process of the triptych, okay, in which we had a dystopian world spreading across the whole country, and we were writing separate novels in different parts of the country about different characters going on. So it's the same setting, if you like, but different characters and different stories, which made it possible, as far as I'm concerned, because, as I say, trying to collaborate on a novel is hell. But since we weren't allowed to stop one another writing anything in our own novels, it was much easier. So I enjoyed this process no end. I found it extremely instructive, as I said, trying to write this phrase character. And these guys have, of course, been collaborating together for decades now, very generous in letting me into their group. So, Tariq, how was it for you, writing in the triptych? How did it go?
Well, I sat really patiently listening to his version of how the triptych came out. It's not all entirely true.
It's completely true. There we go. See, I told you.
The one thing about storytellers is that they tell a great story, and it was a great story. What it didn't add to that a lot of that thinking was done with an awful lot of drinking. And in those moments, some events in what order they take place get reordered. But I shan't go much more than that in this stage. But one of the great points, and difficult points, I'm sure all of you sitting here often wonder about writing your own stories. Well, if you don't, then there's something wrong with you, because all of you have an amazing story to tell. Very often when we sit alone trying to tell our stories, it becomes quite difficult to find our way through. But when we work together as a group, we were already working together insofar as sharing ideas. Me and you and Peter and me and you and Peter in many different ways. And of course, we bring to it quite a complex set of things. Peter, Melvin being white, thinks of things as normal, as white writers often do. On one occasion, there was Peter, me, and Melvin. And I don't know whether we'd already got into the triptych, but there was a story of Melvin's about a truck that has the power to change you into an animal. Was it your story, Melvin?
Yes, I wrote a book called Lady My Life is a bitch about a girl who gets turned into a dog.
That's
A
it.
bitch actually, which is practical, because she wasn't a very nice character.
Now, we had a problem. Pete said, I think we were at his house then, I want to know what the color of the dog is. And I said, Melvin, I've got to ask you, what's the religion? Because we're faced with this wave of Islamophobia, and everything is colored by it. It doesn't matter. So what becomes the norm is the abnorm for me. So in the same applies to Peter. The old racism is still here. The new one has come on top. So working together, we were forever shifting through lots of things, you know. I mean, I can't help trying to rewrite the Communist Manifesto every time I try to write something. And that was being chopped over. And I think what was good, it was really being able to understand that it's a process, it's not an event, and a process unfolds, it's unpredictable, it's enriching, but it can also rewarding, but it can also be very painful. And you know, working together, we shed many a tear and emptied many a beer and things, you know.
Great. Did he answer that question? I think he probably did.
Not really.
Not quite. However, let's move on to another question for you, Tariq.
Why is it called the second coming? Well,
We're getting better questions from the
from
audience.
the audience member. Yeah, that's true.
It's like this all the time. Constantly undermined.
It's true that that's a real kick. But in the second coming, it's because this fanatical group of right-wing Christian militia backed by the Americans believes that the second coming is nigh and it's very near. They're going to resolve the problems of the decay of England and the white world. And they not only ban Islam, but they also ban every other form of Christianity as well, if you like, almost mirroring the sort of early days of ISIS and the different permutations that were being formed in Iraq and later on in Syria and stuff like that. So the second coming is the second coming of their version of Jesus.
Okay, thanks, Andy. We have got questions from the audience coming in later on. So, one of the, Pete mentioned this really difficult middle section of the book where Mara is in hospital. And there are two reasons for that to be sort of technically, this is kind of writing, I'm very curious about this, writing in question. The first thing is that, Mara has begun her life, as you heard from the reading, with an extremely, what's the word, feisty attitude. She's political, she's very forward, not going to take any bullshit off anyone. But when she wakes up in the hospital, she has been rewritten, and she has been impregnated, raped basically, and she thinks that she's the mother of Jesus, the mother of the second coming. This is what she's been kidnapped for. And there are two very difficult things to do there. One is in the first part of that middle section, Mara has to move from, there is a conflict between Mara as this rewritten character and her recovering her memories of her original self. That's a very difficult thing to pull off. And then in the second part of it, she realizes that she's pregnant and that she's been impregnated by the Bloods, this people of this dreadful regime, and she starts off, furious, very angry about the child in her, but she ends up moving, towards a warmer attitude towards it. Both these things, very, very difficult writing challenges. Can you talk us through a little bit through this, first of all, this process of her two different characters, her original character and her rewritten character, and that struggle, and how you approach that?
It was very difficult, really, because there's some parts of, as Peter has said, so I won't revisit that. There were a lot of personal sides. But I live in Beirut, and we have a lot of trauma psychologists as well, and also psychologists, and just people living through these brutal times. And I did meet some younger women as well who'd gone through these forms of trauma. And in a sense, so there was always a very rich bank, so to say. It's because, before I say that somebody's wondering, the shit of life is the goldmine for writers, both individually as well as the life around us, because that's where we dig the experiences out of. So one of the great difficulties, I suppose, I don't look much like a woman, don't feel much like a woman. So there is an element of an integrity of how to maintain that. That was very difficult. But there I had a lot of help from women friends, including lots of young women students, many, there must be dozens, reading through different things. And some of the feedback that people would give would be very little. You can't wear a hijab and have a short sleeve over here, or the color of a nail varnish, or this thing or that thing. And also the emotional turmoils that were going on in a society riddled with war and conflict. And I would dare say to you here, ours is not that different. It's just the war is somewhere else for now. That's all. So when negotiating with trying to get Amara into a position where she has to change, that was very difficult. Initially, the novel actually started her waking up to the position that she has been captured and she's imprisoned and she's chained. It's a very filmatic type scene. That's what one of my neighbors who also read it, and she sort of said that's where she wants to go back as an opening. And then Peter got involved. He forced me to write 30,000 more words, at the beginning, because the beginning kept getting further away from the beginning. And then you sort of got involved and you started, getting me to do more and more work on the ending, and the ending got further away from the end. And in between there was the poor little character trying to negotiate, how do you change now? Not only does the writer change, I certainly change in the process of writing, but the character also changes. And if the character doesn't change, then there is no novel, there is no story, there's no basis. So everything is in the change, but I suppose when you feel passionately about certain points about which you're writing, that change becomes very difficult for you as well. I must have shed bucket loads of tears writing this thing, sometimes on the chapter. Now, in terms of the mental recovery of the process, you see Mara coming from an atheistic household, but actually her recovery is very much within the confines of finding her own way to religion, because it's a religion that's also under attack as well. So in one sense, whilst they're saying you are the mother of Jesus, she then starts praying inside her head if she can't pray in her physical being. And everything that you heard, Ya Ali Mother, at the beginning, references to different forms and sects and unification, it's all implied within the thing. And of course, writing about a form of Christianity, which I'm not sure that it's particularly any better than other extremist sort of positions, I ended up reading an awful lot of the Bible, not in small amounts, analyzing it. A lot of the quotes that you'll come across are actually biblical quotes, including the rewriting of the Ten Commandments. So on the one hand, if the only way to survive is to hold on to the tenets of your own religion, well, there's nothing wrong with that. If that can save you through, can save your humanity, because that's what I believe most, if not all, religions are about, is saving your dignity, saving your humanity. And she finds humanity in the religion that's been demonized. So that was one of the big internal conflicts. And wrapped around those were the conflicts of her own body, its violation also metaphorically by the ruling classes of this country.
Oh, great. So really, you used Mara's tradition of Islam to sort of recover herself, even though she, came from an atheistic household. It leads me on to think that religion, did play a very big part in that book, both in terms of Mara using the tradition of her religion to sort of hang on to her identity, but also with the Bloods. I remember when you first came up with this idea, and it was having a very, very far right government set in this country, but a very, very religious government as well, which was something that I didn't particularly associate with the rights in this country. So why did you pick that idea of religion and bring it so forcibly in the presence of the Bloods? What was the proper name for the Bloods? None of us can ever remember this, except possibly Tariq. What was it?
Was it the Christ?
The Knights of the
Christ Crusaders or something?
Something like that.
It's in the book, though.
It's in the book. Buy the book, we'll find out. So, why did you use religion in the basic scenario to such a large degree?
Well, because I think that, when I look at England, I see an incredibly hypocritical society. But when I look at my own, I also see my own meaning in Pakistan or wherever I live. On the surface, people don't wake up to think, I'm going to blow up the Twin Towers. They get up in the morning and they call out to their God, and then they want to go and work in the fields or work in the factories. Yet the whole projection of religiosity, so-called, across the so-called Islamic world or the Muslim world or the Arab world, it seemed to me was actually not any different from the nonsense that we see over here, with Tony Blair keeping a Bible under his, do you remember those who are young enough to know Tony Blair looking at the Bible, that God spoke to him, if you remember all those things. So actually, I felt that this society, with all its rituals of the Queen, the Church of England, and the church, the role of the church, it doesn't matter if nobody goes to the church or anything like that. And it reminded me of a little anecdote. We used to have a bus driver in Bradford. I forget his name. He died recently. He had a gap in his teeth and he was always smiling. And he knew I wasn't very religious. And one day, he stopped the bus as I was walking in Bradford and he goes, "Tariq?" And I said, "Yes." And I don't know what other passengers made of it. He goes, "What did Karl Marx say before he died?" No, just before he died. I said, "Oh, no." Because I wanted a lift into town, but he wouldn't let me on. He wanted me to pay the fare. And I didn't have any money. And I said, "I don't know." He goes, "God help me." So I thought, that thought lived with me forever. It really doesn't matter what it is. Religion dominates us. So when we create a character, what name we gives it, that's a political definition. It's a religious definition, even if we have a name that's across religions. Like I name some, my children like that. It really doesn't matter. It still is embedded in a space and a time and a culture and a belief. And I think at base level, I believe that the unbelievable can happen so fast. Syria is the land where Jesus' language is still spoken. How did we move from there to where we are today? How did we get there? But we'll leave that for later. So in the fictional world, and I think, hearing the Ten Commandments all alive, hearing that brilliant poem, Jerusalem, by Blake, and then I read a lot of stuff on the English question, on English nationalism. I know it sounds crazy, but if you look very carefully, you see there is another rising political entity in this country. It's a far-right English nationalism. And the more I read into English nationalism, way back in time, England was actually called Little Israel, not the Israel of today, more a spiritual sort of a place. And I grew up with the Blake's poem and did those feet in ancient time, walking upon England's mountains. The green. And of course, his dark and satanic mills may have been the churches and the spires of that period, because he was against those forces of obscurantism at the time. But by the time we came to read it, it became the mills and factories in which we were. So I took a different meaning to it, but it's still all couched within the religiosity of the society.
Thank you. Now then, as I say, this is rather sprung on me, this interview business, but I know that Tariq has actually prepared one or two questions that he wants to be asked.
Have I?
Yes, they're up there on the table, Tariq. Can you remember them?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I think.
Have we had enough?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tariq. That was interesting, and some of those answers were things that I was, have been wondering about. Particularly the role of religion, which is very dominant in that book, and also, as I say, the technical difficulty of manoeuvring your way through that middle section, the personal stuff apart. I think one of the reasons why it took so long is just so bloody difficult. All these novels, I think, are ultimately about identity in one way or another, hanging on to your identity and perhaps finding out what your identity is in the face of political struggle and oppression. So now we come to the section in which we invite questions from the audience. Please.
I'm just curious. Teaching kids in primary school about writing, we always say, consider your audience. And sometimes we might say, well, we'd write differently if you're writing to your granddad, or you'd write differently to a prime minister or someone you don't know. In terms of your respective creative processes, did you have a particular audience that you felt you were writing to or for?
I mean, it's a question, a very good question we're all faced if we work in trying to teach writing or trying to look at our things. I think there is an element, yes, but one thing for me was I have been writing and sometimes children's books for my own children. I began to write my very first novel, which was written in jail. That was for because I believed I could leave a legacy behind if I went to jail for 44 years, as the police were saying at the time I would go down for. So I don't write really for white society. I know it doesn't want to hear what I have to say because I'm not a commercial writer. It doesn't matter, you know. And in one sense, when you start cooking a dish, writing is very much like that. We cook a dish for our own taste and our friends. After it's cooked, the recipe belongs to the world, really. Whoever wishes to eat it, whoever wishes to cook it, it's a bit like that. So I would say those who want to write, and I'm sure both Melvin and Peter and other writers in the room will agree that I think you write to yourself in many ways. And we write lots of it, like you said, or Peter said earlier on. A bit of us comes and bleeds within each book. And a lot of us lives within every story. And the characters are all of you, all of us. So my thing is, I teach creative writing as well. And the hardest job I have with young kids is to make sure you don't think you're white. So the idea of, because when I worked in where I lived in Beirut, a lot of my students wanted to write characters of John Smith on Precinct 15 in New York City. They've never been there. But that's the dominance of a culture that makes us think like that, you know. And just to be true to ourselves. And I wouldn't know, I mean, I wouldn't take it on me to teach primary kids. I'm finding it hard dealing with Peter and Melvin.
Very normally, you had a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the scenario that you established in the 3 novels, and given what happened in Summer with they might use the name The Bloods the next time they come out, given the kind of violence that we saw here, like the bombing of the refugee hotels, and just the street level of violence, which, you know, I haven't seen since the 70s, really. And then the global context in terms of, as you were saying at the beginning as well, about Syria. So I was just wondering how you feel these things, like how dystopic is your dystopic landscape? Like, how close is it matching what we're seeing, like what's gone on in the last 6 to 9 months, I suppose?
That's a very good, complex question, I suppose. One is that I too was here, like most of you people in Manchester, when the last wave that came of the far right, you know, that went across the country. And having lived, there are quite a few friends and comrades in the room who've lived through the previous waves of the 70s. Then the 70s didn't look dystopian because we lived in it. It seemed sort of normal, abnormally speaking. Now, when I look back at the 70s, it's really dystopian. The mills are dying, the place is old, the skinheads on the road, the National Fronts marching, Margaret Thatcher's rising, Labour parties coming with some bullshit or other lying to us, the Tories are lying, everything is falling to bits. And now when I look back at it, that looks pretty dystopian, really. Here's us lot coming here to work in the mills and factories, believing the streets were paved with gold, only to find the streets where we lived were covered in dog shit. We didn't have anything. It was just appalling. And now when we come 40 years on, we see something far more sinister, really. And the sinister thing is that it's not the danger of the hordes that cumber on the streets. It's what's mobilizing them from behind. These are not just happening because one little far right city somewhere in Cyprus on his multi-million-dollar job encouraging people. No, on the contrary, it's coming top down. And it's linked to what's going on in the globe. They carried Israeli flags, a lot of them. They shouted on this, you still can go check, that there was Sharia law coming in the streets of Britain. What have we got to do with Gaza? What have we got to do with Palestine? It was had a religiosity to it. It had an English nationalism to it. It had a Britishness to it. So in that sense, I suppose you all just witnessed, you know, the downfall of a dictatorship within Syria. Nothing, regimes come and go. No need to shed tears on that. but we lost a country. Israel seized vast tracts of land, aided and abetted tooth and nail by the British government. In fact, so much so, if you keep your eyes open, Keir Starmer was in Cyprus saying, we can't tell the world what we did, but I'm proud of you. What do you think they did? They aided the genocide in Gaza. They armed the warplanes. They provided the logistical support. The British soldiers were probably on the ground and still on the ground. So in one sense, the beginning of this triptych was with lots of things with me in a bar in Beirut, where I conveniently called the coup d'etat instead of coup, and where I actually met people, Brits, who claimed to be NGO workers, writers, and things like that. So in a sense, Verinder, what we are witnessing is what the West is creating. It hasn't fallen out of the sky. The regime was a pro-Western regime for a very long time. Do you remember a phrase, the rendition flights, where they took prisoners from here to Syria because torturing them was illegal in England? So they put them on a plane and took them there, tortured them and brought them back. Something like that. So in one sense, we ignore what's going on. If we think you're not connected to what the horror that has been unleashed in that part of the world, West Asia, then I think you've got something far worse than what we could imagine in our triptych to come. How it takes place, when it takes place, I don't know. It can be stopped today, but can it be stopped in 30 years from now? That's what we said 40 years ago. Unless working class communities, white people begin to organize against racism, and in working class communities, then what's going to come next? How will the anti-racist movement be built in there? It won't. So what have we got to look at? I'm hopeful. I think one of the things that the powers and the rulers can't imagine, that people will overcome all the weaponry that they may have, the West, in its attempts to try to subjugate lots of worlds. And how many countries have you seen destroyed? You've seen Libya, do you remember that? There was a dictator there, now we've got ruins. You saw Syria being destroyed. You saw Iraq being destroyed. It's only a matter of time before the focus now switches onto Iran. It's just going to happen. Now, I'm not here to defend any dictatorship. That's not our job. Our job is to try to save humanity. And the writing of novels is one way of us trying to imagine different worlds, different scenarios. And I think that it's a really sad day. For me, it's personally sad. I have friends who've lost their relatives. I have students who've lost brothers and cousins. It's very personal. It's not a far off. I've lost a lot of friends over this. I won't be able to speak to them, because in some of them anyway, because there's nothing to gloat about now, not after the destruction that we see. But that's the nature of the beast in which we live. But anyway, you've come here not to be so depressed. There's a lot of humor in the novel as well, rude, crude humor, and a lot of poetry as well, because we love poems and stuff like that. Samara is a poet. I hope you enjoy it. And we'll write a little review comment somewhere. I got something coming out in a few papers, reviews and stuff. For books like this, we don't do. It was rejected by a lot of publishers. It was called blasphemous by some. Anyway, I better stop. I think Peter is.
I just want to pick up on that fact, because it's just something that the general public may not know, that I've been involved in the development of YA, young adult books, for 20 years maybe. We used to visit Penguin's offices in London and God knows what. Used to be very few Asian writers getting published in that genre. And still now, the representation is very, very low. And the fact that Tariq talked about religion, and he's brave enough to confront the conflicts that arise on the religious plane of life, Islamophobia, for instance, means that, in my view, no mainstream publisher will pick it up, no matter how well he writes. 40 years from now, it may be acclaimed as a classic, and Penguin will be rushing out like that. They're going to publish, or right now, it takes a lot of courage and a lot of integrity to simply write. Coming back to your point, ignoring the imagined audience of the mainstream publishers, and so that's why I think it's an amazing book. It's brilliantly written. It's got such humor. It's shot through with humor. It's true. But you will not find it being extolled or advocated for by Penguin or Hachette or any of the other big players, because they have a market in mind, and that liberal market, in their imagination, will not tolerate this voice. But we don't care. That's right.
Thanks, Melvin. Thanks, Tariq. You can buy the book. We've got the table here for signing if you want to sign.
Thanks for coming. I don't know, the host is Saman, the newly married Saman. And any words you want to say about your wonderful venue? Now that you have your audience, it's a brilliant venue. It's been doing so many amazing events like the Gaza monologues. We've done your audience. Well, they're going to sign, they're going to buy the book for us and everything.
Okay.
The rosy haze of the newly married.
Space. We do a lot of workshops. We run events like we have today. So we had over the week, last week we had Gaza monologues. We had it for two consecutive nights, and we have raised approximately £1,000 for in support of the cause. So yeah, what else? Please buy the book. It would be incredible for Tariq and everybody else. So
The audience might want to know for any refreshment. Do we have any refreshments?
Yes, after, in a few
we
minutes.
do have.
Can I ask a very simple question? Sorry. Obviously, you're saying it's cryptic. Would it matter what order the books are read in?
No.
So they kind of refer to a similar world, but it's not an ongoing story.
No,
anyway.
that's
Okay, are we done? I think we're done. And there you go, you can flock to the bookshop over there with your £15, I think it is, clutched in your eager hands. You can take cards and all that. Thank you so much for coming. Celebrate Tariq's wonderful book. And I hope you all enjoy it.
And please get your copy signed.
Yes, get your copy signed.
I